Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share today's topic with you because we're going to look at how local history acts as this fascinating microcosm that literally drives broader global events. We so often think of history from a top-down perspective, right? We look at massive national movements or these giant global empires. But to really grasp how nations are built, how they industrialize, and how they're thrust onto the world stage, you really have to look at the ground level. So today we're using the state of Wisconsin as our lens to explore exactly how geography, immigration, industry, and identity are all forged by conflict.
250 years. Just think about that for a second. The hook here is that Wisconsin's military involvement spans over 2.5 centuries. That actually means the military history of this region predates the existence of the United States itself. Long before it was the 30th state in the Union, this land was a vital, highly strategic battleground that was deeply connected to nearly every major American conflict.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To make sense of 250 years of history, we're going to break this down into 5 distinct eras: the contested frontier, forging a state identity, the industrial war machine, division and modern defense, and finally, tying it all together in the microcosm of America.
All right, starting us off with Section 1, the contested frontier, looking at the era before 1783.
To really get a feel for these pre-statehood days, you've got to understand that geography dictated absolutely everything. Because of its prime access to the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River, this land was fiercely contested. Back in the 1700s, this wasn't American territory at all. It was a frontier dominated by powerful native nations. We're talking the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Ojibwe, Dakota, Potawatomi, and the Sauk and Fox. They completely controlled the crucial fur trade routes, the military movement channels, and really the whole economic lifeblood of the region. And they were navigating some incredibly complex relationships with French colonial interests and British imperial control way before American settlers even arrived on the scene.
So this entire dynamic totally set the stage for both the Revolutionary Era and the War of 1812. On one side of the coin, you have the Native and British alliance. On the other side, you have this relentless push of American expansion. Many Native nations in the Great Lakes region, led by brilliant figures like Tecumseh, actually allied with the British. And why? Well, because the British had generally restricted American expansion westward, whereas the incoming flood of American settlers directly threatened native lands. Wisconsin's waterways essentially became this vital chess piece in a much wider struggle for the entire North American continent.
Moving right along to Section 2, forging a state identity through these early conflicts. Now, shifting our focus from the physical land over to the people themselves, it's wild to see how the crucible of conflict literally forged a unified state, and fast. In 1832, you have the Black Hawk War. This was Wisconsin's defining early conflict, and it rapidly accelerated white settlement alongside the tragic displacement of native peoples. Fascinatingly enough, the young participants in this frontier war actually included future national leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Jefferson Davis, and Zachary Taylor. That specific conflict led to a massive population boom, which moved us straight into statehood in 1848, and almost immediately after that, into the terrifying onset of the Civil War in 1861. 91,000. That is the staggering number of Wisconsin soldiers who stepped up to serve for the Union during the Civil War. I mean, for a brand new state, that level of mobilization is just unbelievable. But of course, it came at a massive, sobering cost. Over 12,000 Wisconsinites actually died in the conflict. The war completely cemented this young state's identity as deeply, fiercely loyal to the Union and staunchly supportive of anti-slavery efforts.
Zooming in on that military contribution for a second, we absolutely have to talk about the legendary Iron Brigade. Composed heavily of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin Infantry, these guys fought in some of the most brutal battles of the war, places like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Second Bull Run. And what's really incredible here is how immigration actively shapes this fighting force. Large numbers of German and Scandinavian immigrants served, and they earned the brigade this absolutely unmatched reputation for toughness and discipline. They truly define the state's fierce, loyal military identity.
Which brings us to Section 3, the industrial war machine during World War I and World War II.
Now, what's really interesting as we move into the 20th century is how the state morphed into this absolute industrial juggernaut. It led to a massive explosion in military participation. You go from 120,000 citizens serving in World War I, jumping all the way to over 300,000 in World War II. But it definitely wasn't just about the action overseas. The home front was incredibly complex too. For instance, during World War I, because Wisconsin actually had one of the nation's largest German-American populations, local communities faced intense suspicion and anti-German sentiment really exploded. It was a deeply challenging time culturally, even while the state was massively ramping up its military support.
So the crucial point is that this wartime production totally transformed the landscape. World War II completely modernized the state's economy from the ground up. It wasn't just food and basic machinery anymore. They were pumping out trucks, ammunition, ships, and heavy machine tools. And this led to mass urbanization. With thousands of men deployed overseas, women entered the factories in huge numbers to keep things running. Plus, due to massive labor shortages, German prisoners of war held in Wisconsin camps were even put to work on local farms just to keep agriculture afloat.
To really ground this history, just think of some names you probably recognize. Harley-Davidson, Oshkosh Truck, Allis-Chalmers, Kohler. These absolute industrial titans shifted entirely to wartime production. They produced the engines, the heavy equipment, and the vehicle components that became absolutely critical to the Allied victory. War and industry essentially grew up together here, accelerating the state's economic modernization at a blistering pace.
All right, let's head into Section 4, Division and Modern Defense, taking us from the Cold War right up to the present. As we step into the Vietnam era, that unified industrial output we just talked about gave way to deep political fracturing, and Wisconsin mirrored this perfectly. A profoundly jarring event occurred in 1970. During the Vietnam War, college campuses across the entire state became epicenters of anti-war protests. At UW-Madison, anti-war activists actually bombed Sterling Hall, which tragically resulted in the death of a researcher. This event starkly symbolized the incredibly deep national political divisions of the era. It's a really sobering reminder that wartime history is not just about battlefields overseas, right? It deeply, and sometimes very painfully, fractures the home front as well.
And, all of this brilliantly illustrates how the state evolved yet again to meet the demands of the modern era. Wisconsin basically pivoted to become a massive hub of modern logistics and tactical operations. Facilities like Fort McCoy became absolutely central to American military readiness. They've handled everything from global mobilization during the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan to large-scale refugee processing. Meanwhile, companies like Oshkosh Defense became nationally known for producing the exact modern tactical vehicles that are used by armed forces today.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the microcosm of America, where we see how this all acts as a national mirror.
When we actually pull all these threads together, we realize something pretty profound. This isn't just the story of one single state. It is the story of America itself. Let's just walk through this evolutionary chronology one more time. Step 1, the indigenous frontier. Step 2, an agricultural state stepping up big time in the Civil War. Step 3, an industrial powerhouse during the World Wars. And Step 4, a modern logistics center today. Those 4 pillars of geography, immigration, industry, and politics were repeatedly and aggressively accelerated by conflict. War literally pushed the timeline forward at every single step. This timeline perfectly mirrors those broader national shifts we all learn about. Think about it. During Western expansion, it was the contested frontier. During the Civil War, it provided the vital manpower needed to save the Union. During America's rise to a global superpower in WWI, it was the manufacturing powerhouse. And in our modern era of complex geopolitics, it's a high-tech defense production hub. Wisconsin didn't just sit back and participate in American history. It actively reflected and fueled the nation's entire evolution.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. We've just traced 250 years of global impact stemming from one very specific region. So, how has the geography and history of your own local area shaped broader global events? I really challenge you to apply this exact same structured way of thinking to your own hometown. Look at your local rivers, your oldest factories, your demographic shifts over the decades. You might just start seeing your local history and world history in a completely brand new light. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.